Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to today's edition of the Coal Seam. I'm Chris Hamilton, and I'll be your host here over the next 28 minutes or so. I want to thank you for joining us, and today we're gonna talk about some of the things that are going on with our marketing of West Virginia coal. We have a real strong global market with our metallurgical coal at the current time. And conversely, we have somewhat of a real weak market going on with our steam coal or thermal coal. And for those of you that are joining us here today and maybe unfamiliar with those terms, it's all bituminous coal, but we have some of the highest grade metallurgical coal used in the manufacturing of steel that you'll find anywhere in the world. And for the most part, that's located within the southern part of our state, although there's some reserves in north central West Virginia as well, but predominantly in the south. And we also have steam or thermal coal that's used for the generation of electricity. Joining me in the studio here today is Mr. Jason Bostic with the Coal Association. He's the guy we all turn to when we inquire about who's using our met coal, how much steam coal we're using. He's the statistician of the office and probably knows more about this topic than most run around the coal field. So with that, Jason, thanks so much for joining us here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Was I accurate in my bifurcation there of the two different types of bituminous coal we use?
You absolutely were. And your market description was dead on. We've seen over the last 3 years primarily a major uptick in export coal. And for the first time in a long time, it's not just metallurgical coal that's going to make steel around the globe, but we found a huge demand for thermal coal and steam coal in Europe. Those countries, Germany and others, are struggling with some of the carbon mandates that were published by the European Union. So they've closed or shut in a lot of their own coal production, but they're still using coal-fired electricity to a large degree. So some of our very high-quality, low-sulfur steam coals found a home in Europe, thankfully. It's allowed us to increase production and increase employment, primarily in the southern coal fields.
So we do have two types of coal, met coal and thermal coal. And the met coal is used to manufacture steel. Domestically, are we making any steel at the current time here?
We are. It's down dramatically from when it was historically. But I think for the first time ever, steel production in the United States is up. It's up, I think, 6%. And a lot of that has to do with some of the tariffs that the president has imposed on foreign steel. That's allowed steelmakers to ramp up production and also announce major rehabilitation of their existing facilities. I think U.S. Steel is actually going to restart 2 or 3 blast furnaces at an Illinois facility. That kind of shocked a lot of us. We thought they were going to be down.
I remember reading about that.
The Granite City Works.
July or maybe in the fall, early fall.
Yeah.
When that announcement was coming.
Yeah, and our metallurgical coal, we're blessed here in West Virginia. Met coal isn't found in most parts of this country. It's primarily West Virginia, pockets of Virginia, and some very high quality stuff located in Alabama. But if you're making steel just about anywhere around the globe, you're going to need some blend of West Virginia coal to make that steel.
Interesting, but that's not to say that West Virginia is the only source or the only provider of that coal.
No, sir, it's not. We've got massive competition on the metallurgical scale from Australia. They produce so much metallurgical coal that they set the global benchmark in both price and production. Most of the Australian production is sent into Asia just because of proximity. But if steel production goes down, say in China, then the Australian metallurgical production is freed up to flow throughout the rest of the world and can get to what we consider to be our traditional markets, which is South America and Europe.
You know, when people think about and we've always said that we have some of the finest grade coal, finest quality you'll find anywhere in the world. But again, there's a lot of competition on the foreign or global dance floor, and there's a lot of countries that mine coal, even with steam. You know, I think I think I'll be within the ballpark when I say that the United States, represents about only 1 out of 7 or 8 tons of coal that's shipped around the world and consumed.
Yes.
So there's a lot of mining countries out there. A lot of countries ship a lot more coal than what we ship. A lot of countries use a lot more coal than what we use.
Yeah, and
I think Indonesia is another source.
yeah, the thermal market in Asia, the developing thermal market in India and China for the production of steam or electricity, Indonesia supplies a great deal of that. And one of the things that we're watching very closely for that European market that's turned out to be so important for us for electricity coal are coal reserves in the former Soviet Union that are the interior part of the Soviet Union that are now being developed. So that that market has a lot, it's easier to get that coal to Europe, obviously, than it is our coal. It can move entirely by land-based transportation.
From Russia.
From Russia.
You know, I think I read where either last year or year before when we had the polar vortex, formerly known as February, if I'm not mistaken, one of the New England states actually received shipments of coal from the Soviet Union.
They did. There was 2 or 3 deep water vessels loaded with Russian coal, and the characteristics of the coal, its heating properties and its emission properties are just about dead on with what we produce here in West Virginia.
And as we talked earlier, it's almost, I mean, it's very difficult to believe how much coal we were actually importing as a country just 15 years ago.
Yeah, the southern states, Florida, Alabama, Texas, imported a lot of Colombian coal.
Colombian coal, and I think some of that Indonesian coal
Yeah.
made its way here. And, you know, to think that we, at one point, not too long ago, I mean, we're not talking about 50, 60 years ago.
No.
You know, we're talking about just, you know, immediately prior to, you know, when we went through that period of time known as the War on Coal. You know, it wasn't too long before then, you know, probably in the early 2000s that we almost became a net importer of coal as a country, and that's just so hard to believe today.
Yeah, 97, 98, 99 I think was our record year of imports because the domestic production here in this country was stretched just about as thin as it could get. And, you know, we could produce more, but the transportation infrastructure, the railroads and the inland waterways were just about maxed out. So it was much easier for those southern utilities to buy the South American coal. And
That's amazing. Overall, what are some of the production trends here last couple of years? I know we went 6 or 7 years with you know, losing about half of our state's production, downward trends, you know, downward spirals. We saw you know, across the board on employment. Some of that's coming back, we understand.
The most recent record, well, not recent record, but the recent low would have been 2016 when we only mined 85 million tons. That's probably the lowest number it's ever been since the middle 70s.
And I think for the first time in the history since we kept the records, we were below 100 mines.
Yes.
I mean, we went from a couple thousand mines 30 years ago.
Yeah, we shed a whole lot of production, a whole lot of employment, unfortunately, in that same period of time. And that was a combination of a very bad economy and the forced closure of some of the power plants that resulted from some of the EPA regulations. So that was 83 million tons. In 2017, we started going back up. Well, I think we hit 93 million tons in 2017. But the concerning thing for us here in West Virginia is about 100% of that increase was on the export market, metallurgical and thermal. And we've seen the domestic market, particularly for electricity production, it's actually gone down more since a low point of 2016. We've managed to increase our domestic metallurgical production and our export thermal or steam coal and our export metallurgical production. But the amount of our coal being used to generate electricity in this country continues to slip. It's down, I think, to about 44 million tons.
So the amount of coal that we're shipping to other countries has increased. The amount of coal other countries are burning has increased, but we've decreased our coal usage here domestically or within the United States borders.
Yes, with respect to electrical generation, that's absolutely right in our case. Now, it's not to say that nationally that number has gone down too. Coal from other states, Wyoming, but there are certain states where the coal production has increased for electricity demand, primarily Illinois and Indiana, what we refer to as the Illinois Basin,
Right.
that mid-continental coal region. the power plants as they
Pennsylvania's probably gone up a little bit too.
yeah, Pennsylvania's reversed their downward trend as
Yeah.
well. And what we found when we look at the data and the individual shipments is that West Virginia coal is being substituted at the remaining coal-fired power plants by coal from other states.
Not subsidized, but substituted.
Substituted. On a ton-for-ton basis, they're burning less West Virginia coal and probably burning more Pennsylvania or Illinois basin coal. And that's really, as you know, that's heartbreaking because West Virginia coal is higher quality than both of those states. It burns cleaner and it burns hotter than coal from the Illinois basin or the northern or the southern part of Pennsylvania. And I think it's primarily just a function of cost. West Virginia steam coal.
And it's also, I also know that 7, 8 years ago, because of the higher quality of some of the coals found in West Virginia, even for steam generation, electricity generation, you had to have a certain amount of West Virginia coal.
Yes.
Or it was more desired because of its clean burning, heat producing characteristics. But that's not the case today.
No, the rules that were passed by the Obama administration, I shouldn't say passed, proposed, that have never fully been implemented. The Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, has stayed or reversed each set of those rules. But the utilities, the power generators around the country, started to implement those requirements anyway. So they installed extremely expensive emission control technology to the tune of about $1 billion a plant. And that allows them to burn coal from just about anywhere. And so the low sulfur, high quality coal from West Virginia, it's not that it fell out of favor, it's just that it's priced too high, given the fact that you can burn coal from just about anywhere.
You know, we were saying several years ago that once we went through this period of survival and austerity and downsizing, you know, the state's coal industry would still be a major economic driver. It'd still be a major industry, and I think that's where we are today. You know, we are considerably smaller. We lost about a half of everything. We recovered some, so we're 2/3 of what we were today, roughly, and or maybe 60%. And that's still a sizable industry in the state. You know, it still accounts for, you know, a tremendous amount of our state's, gross product. John Deskins did a report, and I think it demonstrated that even at today's reduced profile, you know, the industry still counts for 1 out of every 6 state dollars that are generated.
Yeah. And, Chris, the other thing is as you know, the coal industry's impact locally in certain counties is so important. Even at a reduced profile, we're still about the only economic activity in town. We're the only tax base. We're the only employment base. So even though we've lost almost half of our coal production, we're still probably the single most important industry that we have here.
And unlike other industries, those jobs are sustained over time.
Yes.
You know, they're not jobs that are created while the mine is started and then evaporate, you know, once the mine continues to operate. You know, it takes every one of the same number of jobs or more to sustain the operation of a mine than it did to start the mine.
Yeah, no, very little transient employment, and it's, you know, mining complexes, individual coal mines, can last remarkably long. I think some of the larger mines in northern West Virginia have probably been there going on 50 years. And that's true in southern West Virginia. Individual mining complexes probably going on 50 or 60 years old.
I'll give you one from northern West Virginia. American Electric Power, AEP, operated some of their own mines up in the northern part of the state. And there was a mine in Brook in Ohio County known as the Windsor Mine. And back 25 years ago now, that mine celebrated its 100th year of operation. In fact, our Assistant Secretary for Mine Safety and Health, who's running the federal enforcement program, David Zetazalo, was superintendent at that mine at an earlier point in his life.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's 100 years that mine was in operation.
Yeah, and people usually don't think that mining operations that last that long, but given the amount of infrastructure and the talent of the West Virginia coal miner and our ability to engineer our way through some of these difficulties, it's amazing how long an individual installation can last.
And of course, the model today is much smaller mines, shorter duration, and most of the remaining mineable coal seams lend themselves to shorter duration.
Yeah.
Both size, complexity, number of people, number of tons.
And that's especially true in southern West Virginia on some of the metallurgical coal. Smaller pockets high up on the ridge line where you may only be able to mine 10 or 12 years before you have to move across the ridge or across the hollow to the next pocket of the reserve.
Looking at the crystal ball, what do you see? What kind of trend will 2019 be very similar to 2018?
We certainly hope so. But I think one of the things that's starting to concern us, as you and I have talked before, we'll start with the domestic metallurgical industry, the manufacturing of steel. The steel industry in this country is up. It will likely stay up, given every indication that we have from an economic overall standpoint of the performance of the U.S. economy. But we have shrunk our steel industry so much. There was so much infrastructure, so much capacity retired in the late 70s through the 80s up to now. We just can't make that much more steel here. There's no blast furnace capacity. There's no coke oven capacity. So while that market will increase, I think we're probably to the point now where we're probably within 5 or 10 million tons of the demand being absolutely maxed out. And if you look internationally, there are some signs that the thermal coal exports into Europe will start to go down because of new gas line infrastructure from Russia, those former Soviet territories. There's more foreign coal outside of the U.S. imports that's coming into Europe. And there's some signs that their economy is starting to slow down a little bit. And the domestic metallurgy, or the international steel making or met industry is extremely hard to predict because China, being the world's largest steel maker, depending on the government mandates on steel production and how much crude iron that they produce, that can almost change overnight. And the other added complicating factor there is Australia. As we talked, the coal industry in Australia, its shipping lines, the railroad lines and the shipping ports are very susceptible to adverse weather. So if it rains too much or a typhoon, then Australia can't meet the metallurgical demands of China, which obviously makes a demand for us. But I think overall, some extraneous weather event aside, I think overall the international steel demand is going to slow down just a little bit. And the domestic electricity market, we continue to be gravely concerned about that. I think overall the plant closures have slowed to a tolerable level. They're going to continue at least for the next couple of years or so. But when we did the analysis, most of those plants don't take a lot of West Virginia coal. But as those power plants are closed, the coal states that did supply them, that tonnage is now available on the broader market. And if it's priced lower than ours, then we're going to see further erosion of that domestic electricity market. Because again, most of the coal from those surrounding states is cheaper than ours. And it'll be available on the market where it wasn't before.
I think a real interesting point you raised, perhaps worth a little more analyses, and that is the number of plant closings that have occurred, not just here in West Virginia, but within the region, if you will, where we have always shipped and transported coal. I know, 20 years ago, again, things have changed, but 20 years ago, we were shipping coal to practically every single state east of the Mississippi River, and I believe there were over 150, 160 coal-fired, utility plants that we shipped coal to.
Yes.
And, I understand that number's, really diminished here.
Yeah, just to give you an idea, we went from, as you said, 165 plants in as recently as 2008 That number fell to 56 plants in 2017, and it's going to be down to 52 or 51 plants when we get the final data for last year in 2018.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why we probably will unlikely reach the same levels of coal production that we recorded 10 years ago,
Yeah.
15 years ago.
Yeah, I think that
People ask that all the time, as you well know. You know, are we going to return back to where we were? Is the industry going to rebound totally? And that's very unlikely, it seems, you know, based on what we know today.
unfortunately, the outright market destruction or the demand destruction, the forced closure of those power plants has eliminated so much of that. So even if we were, say, to displace coal from other states, we've lost so many electric generating plants. We've lost 400 power plants, coal-fired power plants nationally, that demand has just been destroyed. There's no way you can bring it back because there's nowhere to burn the coal.
I know there's a lot of discussion about reducing the severance tax that's levied on every ton of West Virginia coal. And, you know, I've looked at that issue, and it's not as if the industry is trying to get rid of its tax burden or not pay any tax at all. But there are states that we're competing with that do not pay severance tax, not a penny.
Yes. The majority of the states that we directly compete with have no severance tax. Or if they have one, I think Ohio has a severance tax, but it's like 10 cents a ton. It's a set rate. Kentucky has a severance tax that's very similar to ours, but we saw after the closure of the power plants that we were just talking about that we're not so much directly competing with Kentucky coal anymore. We compete a lot with the Illinois Basin, Illinois, Indiana, and here recently the trends we've seen are competition from Pennsylvania, which has no severance tax. And again, it's kind of heartbreaking because transportation costs from Pennsylvania and Illinois are higher than they are in West Virginia. We're closer physically to the remaining power plants. But the severance tax imposition here can force us out of those markets. I mean, we really are losing coal contracts on cents or maybe $1, $1.50. And severance tax can account for some of that.
Everybody in the industry knows that contracts are won and lost on nickels and dimes.
Yes.
You know, they're not won and lost on $5, $6, $7. It's nickels and dimes.
And you know, I think it's a testimony to the industry and the ingenuity of our workforce, our coal miners and our managers, that we were able to weather the dramatic downturn between 2014 up to 2016 in the war on coal, as it was referred to. And to do that, we had to modernize these operations and cut costs as much as we could and make them as efficient as possible. But I think what we've seen is the ability of the industry to do that from an individual mine standpoint, we've just about reached the depth of that. Now we're going to have to look at some of the government impositions and see how they're affecting the market from a production and tax standpoint.
You know, real quick, just to shift a little bit, you know, we talk about how efficient we've become and how great our workforce is today. I mean, it's a level of journeyman, you know, with 20, 30 years of experience and the competency and qualification. But, you know, mine reclamation has been excellent as well. I mean, these guys that are reconfiguring the land mass out there, again, have great experience in what they're doing. And, you know, you don't hear of bad high walls left. You don't hear of, you know, mining operations that aren't, you know, converted into just real top quality, excellent reclamation projects.
Yeah, I think that's another compliment for the industry. Just through the really bad trough of production declines and, quite frankly, coal company bankruptcies. One of the things I think we can speak very proudly of as a state was there was no reclamation liabilities shed by a coal company onto the state or the taxpayer through that downturn.
And we got a couple minutes left, and you know, I think it's maybe important to note the dangers that exist within some of these abandoned mines. You know, there was a couple recent, very high-profile incidents where individuals wandered deliberately or or unintentionally into underground workings. And these areas, they fill with water, they fill with gas, and then to make matters worse, we're committed to have to rescue these individuals who can't find their way out.
Yeah, it's probably can't say enough about the dangers of a mine, of a coal mine. And as you probably know better than anybody, is if you're not a trained, certified underground coal miner, then you have absolutely no business being past the entry point of an underground mine, especially with respect to one that's either been abandoned or one that's been placed on inactive status where the operator sealed it temporarily, and as the market improves, they intend to go back. In addition to the water danger, the gas danger, the fact that you're probably in an oxygen deficient environment. And the further you go back, the more likely you are to be in that oxygen deficient environment. And then from the working coal miner standpoint, or the active industry standpoint, the fact that we have to mobilize mine rescue teams to go in there and get those folks, that's an extremely hazardous undertaking.
I want to compliment the work those guys do. They're unbelievable. I mean, those, if there's such a term of, the special forces of the coal mining industry, it applies to our mine rescue teams.
Absolutely.
And there's just no question. Those guys have a level of confidence and commitment in what they're doing. Again, just like the miner today has all this experience, our mine rescue teams today, for the most part, have been practicing and training and competing in contests for a long number of years.
Some of the absolute best emergency responders in this country, or anywhere around the globe, I think.
Yes, without question. And there's no delay or hesitation when they're called, to action. So I tell you, that's a great rundown of where we are, and you just can't thank you enough for your insight on global and domestic markets. And we're just about out of time here, so it's probably a good place to stop. And most importantly, we want to thank you for watching today's edition of the Coal Scene. And thanks so much to the Library Television Network.